What's up guys, my name is Liam and today we're going to be taking a look at the G820 Mini. This is a shape that's similar to a G703 if they had a mini version, which people have been asking for. But is this going to be the perfect gaming mouse for you? Let's check it out. Alright guys, and before we get started today, I did want to let you know that MetKeys did send this out to me. Thank you guys very much for that. With that being said, everything you're going to be seeing in this video today is going to be my own words and my own opinions. Here you have this plain and simple white box. Here is the company's name. I'm not going to try and say it and butcher it because I know I would sound like an idiot. But on the back, very minimal details, so let's go ahead and open it up. Here at the top, we have this envelope. The mouse is over here to the left side, and here it is on the top. And on the bottom comes in this white colorway. They also do include the USB receiver and the USB dongle adapter as well. This mouse also has a removable rear shell, which we'll get into here shortly. But the one thing that I really like about this is they do provide you a couple of different rear shells. And I do feel like any gaming mouse company that does have a mouse with a removable shell on it, I think it'd be an awesome idea if they were to include multiple different rear shells because these shells have different shapes and we will jump into that here shortly. And then last but not least, they also do include a white USB-C cable. And over here inside the envelope, they do have an instruction manual. It looks like we got a sticker, an extra set of PTFE skates, and they do include some white grips in here as well. Another thing that they do include that I was pretty confused on when I opened this box up is they do got these little cutouts here, and there's markings on the back with numbers indicating different sizes. At first I thought these were some type of like skates, glass skates, something like that, but when I pulled them out, the edges are kind of scratchy, so I realized they're not skates. And upon doing some digging, what I realized, it's really cool, is that these are actually inserts for the bottom of the switches, and they are different thicknesses. They have a 0.4 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter, 0.6 millimeter, 0.7 millimeter, different thicknesses. That way, if you're not satisfied with the pre or post travel on your switches, you can just swap out these little pads that are included to adjust it. And for me personally, I thought that this was a really cool and unique touch. And coming over to the mouse, starting at the bottom, very simple functionality here. Over here to the left, you do have a power button. And if you were to power the mouse on by flipping the switch up, it turns the mouse on without the RGB. And then they have another option down here at the bottom. So if you were to power it on by switching it down, it would power the mouse on, and it does enable the RGB. And over here to the right, you do have the RGB button. So if you were to push this, it does allow you to cycle through the different styles of RGB modes. They do have these typical harsher style of PTFE skates. Not really the biggest fan of these, but as you can see here, there's plenty of real estate to put your own dots or type of custom setup on here. And if you guys have any experience with mice like the Ajaz AJ199, as you can see here, the layout, build, and materials, they all feel pretty much identical to the same thing. So if you do have experience with that mouse or anything similar, you kind of know what to expect. When it comes to the coating, I do believe this is just a straight injection plastic mold type of a style of a mouse with no coating on it. The surface does feel very smooth. As I've mentioned to you guys previously, for me personally, I don't really have any issues gripping mice myself, but I have wet my hands, and if you were to get sweaty hands or something like that, I have noticed that the surface can be a little bit slippery, so it's a good thing they did include additional grips with it. This does use Huano micro switches. I'm not sure exactly which ones they are. They do feel pretty good, but I do feel like the implementation on here is just a little bit heavier than some of the other mice that I've been currently using, but the click implementation on this is really nice. And even though they do include those additional pads to adjust the clicks yourself if you need to, I didn't find that I really needed to do so because they feel pretty good out of the box. There's very minimal, almost no pre-travel. If you're actuating at the middle of the switch, which is where I grip the mouse personally, it has very minimal post-travel as well. So overall, the clicks, they feel very good on here. And the same thing over on the right side. As typical, just a slight bit more of pre-travel, but not much. But you have a nice defined click here. Not too much post-travel when actuating from the middle of the switch as well. Like I'd mentioned, these clicks do feel a little bit heavier, and you do definitely notice it if you were to kind of grip the mouse somewhere from the back and actuate them towards the rear. They do get a bit heavier, and they start to get a little lighter as you make your way towards the front. The overall build on this mouse honestly feels really good, but I do feel like the plastic is a little softer. Once you do get towards the front of the switch, if you were to grip the mouse up here in the very front, it does make some contact there, and you do get kind of some bending on the plastic. There also is very minimal side-to-side play, and a little bit of rocking, but again, nothing that I felt was too bad or that I noticed during my gameplay. The scroll wheel feels pretty good. It has some nice defined steps. It is pretty lightweight, and the middle mouse button, once you do click it down there, it feels a little heavier, but nothing that's too hard to press, and pretty easy to spam if you need to do so. And then you have the DPI button back here in the middle. I do feel like the DPI button does stick up kind of high compared to the scroll wheel, but when I started gripping this mouse and playing with it, I didn't really notice it. I kind of like to be a little bit more aggressive on my claw grip the way that I was holding this. So when I was using the scroll wheel, I didn't find it to get in the way for me personally. The side buttons also feel pretty good on here. As you can see here, it does have this design where they all kind of are flushed together. So there's not really a good point towards the middle that gives you a gap to where you can really tell them apart from one another easily. But I do feel like the layout and where they're located is pretty good. And when it comes to the clicks, they do feel really good. There's just a very slight bit of pre-travel on the rear side button and the front side button. There's a little less on the front side button. The front side button has a little bit of post travel, but not much. I do feel like on the rear side button, however, it does have quite a bit more of the post travel there. And you can kind of wobble around a little bit, not that much of a big deal, but you can kind of push it a little bit into the mouse there. And then next up, moving over to the integrity of the shell, this thing really does feel solid. As I was gaming with it, I didn't have any issues. I don't notice any creaking, popping, not a whole lot of flexing or anything like that. I did find that if you were somebody that likes to squeeze your mouse really hard and do give it a death grip, like I'd mentioned with the buttons, this is kind of a softer style of a plastic. So if you did push really hard, you can get some bending there and you can actually activate the side buttons. Again, it wasn't an issue for me personally. I don't push that hard on my mouse myself. And then on the top shell, I did kind of notice that if you were to push down really hard on the top here, you can activate that DPI button. But there is software for this mouse. It does give you an option to actually disable the DPI button or just set it to 1, so you wouldn't have to worry about it swapping on you if that was an issue. But again, like I said, for me personally, when I was gaming with this in game, I didn't notice any type of flexing or anything like that personally. All right, so let's drop a click and quality sound test. And next up, when it comes to the weight, if you do have this solid shell on here, looks like on my scale coming in at 71.2 grams, and they actually do have this honeycomb style shell as well. So if we were to swap over to that, looks like that would drop it down to about 68.7 grams. The balance on here, I do feel like it's really good. It has a really good center balance from front to back. And even when coming over to the left and right, it does feel solid. They do have software that does come with a mouse that is downloadable on metkeys.com store page. I'll go ahead and I'll provide you guys with links for that if you're to pick this up and looking to download the software. Similar types of stuff that's been used by other mice in the past, so real simple to use. It does come in English. This mouse does come with a 3395 sensor in it, and when you go in the software, typical types of settings, it had a debounce time set at 8 milliseconds for the click latency. And then going over to the second page is where it allows you to adjust the polling rate and DPI. There's not an option in here to enable or disable motion sync, so I haven't been able to confirm whether this mouse does have it or not, but if it does, it doesn't give you the option to disable in the software. One thing that I did want to note about the software, however, is as I was using it, I was trying to change the DPI, and I noticed that just by dragging this slider and moving it around, it wasn't actually changing the DPI on my mouse, and there's not like any type of a confirm button here or anything like that. So what I had to do is, once I had set the DPI here in the software, I just came over to the mouse and I pressed the DPI button up here in the top middle, and it actually highlighted the DPI in the software, and it did change it from that point moving forward on my mouse. It does come with a 300 milliamp hour battery, and it's estimated to give you 38 hours of battery life, and that is if you have the RGB disabled. And the overall performance is working out really well for me. I actually reviewed the AJAZ AJ199 a little while back, and it did have kind of weird issues, like where we'd have these weird sleep functions and stuff like that. This mouse never went to sleep on me. It performed great the entire time I was using it. The signal never seemed spotty or anything like that, so really good stuff. The 3395 sensor seemed to track well. I did test this out on glass pads, other various different types of colored mouse pads, and the entire time I used it, it seemed to perform really good. And when it comes to the shape, as you can clearly see, it does have that kind of ergo style shape, but the top, it doesn't slant down very aggressively to the right side. It does a little bit, but it kind of feels more in line with something like a mix between an ambi shape and an ergo shape. It doesn't have too aggressive of a height over here on the left side. I always put the size of my hands down in the description below, and this has really been a joy to use. It's been very comfortable. It is a little bit on the heavier side, but when you are comparing it to something like the G703, which weighs in at over 100 grams, this definitely feels a little bit smaller, lighter, and a little bit more comfortable for my grip style. I did find it a little easier to claw grip. If you do have smaller hands, you can do a palm on it, and I didn't have too much of a difficult time with using a fingertip grip on it. And as I mentioned earlier, it does have these removable shells. And first off, you do get kind of this flatter style shape. It still's got kind of a little bit of an aggressive hump there, as you can see in the rear. But if you were to compare it to something like the one that has holes in it, these two shells are actually identical. They're the same shape. The only differences between these two is obviously this one has holes in it and it's a little bit lighter weight. But then they do give you this other optional rear end back here. And if you guys can see here, the differences between these two is this one has a flatter curved profile. It tapers off less aggressively from the top middle hump out to the sides. And this one has a much more pronounced hump. So this feels a little bit pointier in your hands. It sticks up a little bit more. And as you can see here, it tapers off to the sides a lot more aggressively. And I thought it was really cool that they did include a different style shape in the box as well. I thought that was an awesome idea, and it was pretty fun to swap back and forth between these two to see which one I preferred. All right, so first off, when comparing it to the Vaxee NP-01s, the overall size of both of these mice are actually not that far off from one another. If you can see it from the front, the G820 just sits a little bit wider at the base, but not too much. But it does kind of have this thing where it kind of flares out towards the top. Coming over to the rear, as you can clearly see on the NP-01s, it does feel a little bit flatter. I do feel like you do have a little bit more of a hump over here on the left side, and it does kind of taper off a little bit over to the right side. The one major difference, obviously, is that the Vaxee is a lot flatter here at the top, to where this sticks up a lot higher on the G820 Mini. And it gives you a lot more support in the palm if you're doing some type of a relaxed claw grip or a palm grip with it. All right, the next up, if you compare it to something like the Pulsar Xlite V2 Mini. Both of these mice, they do actually feel pretty different from one another. I do feel like the curves on the Xlite V2 Mini, they're just a bit more aggressive. It does feel a little bit more narrow down at the bottom portion of the mouse. Coming over here to the rear, as you can see on the Xlite V2 Mini, it has way more aggressive curves, so it does feel narrow also at the top of the mouse. Then coming over here from the side profile, as you can clearly see, you definitely get more hump here in the rear of the mouse, whereas on the Mini, it just kind of tapers off more aggressively down to the rear. And next up, comparing it to the Waizowl OGM Pro. Starting out with the bottom, the Waizowl definitely feels like just a way bulkier and thicker mouse in the hands, as you can clearly see here from the bottom. Even if we were to come over here to the rear profile, the Waizowl does feel flatter at the top, and overall it just feels all around wider. And then finally, when it comes to the overall height between these two mice, as you can see, they're not that far off from one another. I do feel like you get a bit more support with more of a rear type hump over here on the G820 Mini, where as on the Waizowl OGM Pro, it does kind of taper off more aggressively. So it does kind of feel like a bit of a shorter mouse in the hands, but with that being said, it just feels much wider as well. All right, and then finally, when comparing it to the Lamzu Thorn. Starting out with the bottom, the Lamzu Thorn does feel like an overall thicker mouse, where the G820 Mini does feel a bit thinner. Coming over to the rear profile, they don't feel that far off from one another. I do feel like the left side over here kind of curves down, and it does feel a little bit higher over here on the Thorn, but you do have a pretty equally aggressive curve over here to the right side. So I do feel like you get a little bit more support here on the left side of the Thorn. And again, like I said, it just feels a bit wider in the hands. Coming over to the side profiles, I do kind of feel like you get a little bit more of a hump back here in the rear on the G820 Mini, but I do feel like the Lamzu Thorn, it just kind of has characteristics to make it feel like overall a bigger mouse than the G820 Mini. All right, guys, so that wraps things up on the G820 Mini, coming in at $45.99. I feel like it's a really good deal. I really like the shape and size of the mouse. It felt really comfortable in my hands. So if you have any questions, I feel like I left anything out, please let me know down in the comments below. Aside from that, if you've enjoyed watching this video and are interested in seeing more videos like this in the future, please drop this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I've included affiliate links down in the description below if you're interested in picking up any of these mice and supporting the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one.